Chapter 20. Mr. Fanshawe did not come home. 1 week passed, then another. The sky turned hot and white. Outside the air grew thick, and the sun beat down on the river so that it burned silver at midday. The fish plunged deeper in the water, trying to escape the heat. In the garden, Jack and Rue continued to tend the newest green shoots. They grew more thickly every day. The weeds did too. Jack and Rue tugged at them day in and day out, though the heat in the garden bore down on them mercilessly. The soil could not drink enough. They had no sooner poured out their bucket loads than the earth turned ashen again. "The flowers look feverish," Jack said. Rue knew what he meant. The colors were almost too bright, like skin that was flushed. If the heat kept up, she doubted they could keep them alive. Outside, Sir was croaking. He had staked out his hunting grounds by the cove, and now he often chased off ducks or loons that came too close, charging at them with his rasping call. But when the croaking didn't stop, Jack frowned. "What is it?" Rue asked. "I don't know." Jack started for the trapdoor, but it was too late. Miss Valentine had appeared, then her body. In a moment she was standing in the garden, her face pale with outrage, and beside her stood Mr. Fanshawe. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" Miss Valentine demanded. Rue's attention was on her uncle, though. His brow was clenched as his eyes shifted across the stretch of flowers blooming wildly everywhere. "How is this possible?" he muttered. "It's the girl," Miss Valentine said. I told you she's been a problem from the start, but this is beyond everything. I had no idea, Mr. Fanshawe." She glared at Rue and demanded, "Who is the boy there? How did he get into the house? Does Violet know what you've been up to?" "You can go, Miss Valentine," Mr. Fanshawe said. "Leave my bags in the boat. I'll get them later." She left reluctantly, showering a withering look on both Rue and Jack before she went. For a moment Mr. Fanshawe stood quite still, looking at the flourishing blooms tumbling across the garden. Petals dripping from tall stems nudged against wild bursts of orange and purple thread-like petals that reached out like sea anemones. And rising up out of the waxy green leaves growing in the soil and on the rocks were the brilliant spiked flames of the flower that had grown by Philip's foot. In her uncle's face, Rue recognized the look of wonder mixed with something else, something more tangled. "How did you do this?" he asked in a faraway voice. "The garden was dead." "It was dying, but it wasn't dead," Rue told him. We watered it from the river," Jack said. "Philip helped," Rue added defiantly. Mr. Fanshawe looked at her full on, and once again Rue felt a lurch of emotion at how like her father he was. But then his expression hardened, and her father vanished. "You brought my son here? You had no right," he reproached. "I shut the garden up for a reason." "For what reason?" Rue demanded. "If you plan on living in this house, Rue, there's one thing you'll have to learn," he said coldly. "The Fanshaws are private people. We keep our troubles to ourselves." "You keep things hidden. There's a difference," Rue shot back. "There were living things in this garden when you shut it up. You nearly killed them. And you've done the same thing to Philip. You walled him up in this house, and now you've walled him up in some clinic. Everything is a secret here. Everything is hidden. I hate it. I don't blame my father for running away." Mr. Fanshawe flinched at this. Then he looked around the garden again, his eyes settling for a moment on the boulder. "You want to know why I shut up the garden?" he said. Rue nodded. "I suppose he's told you the local gossip." Mr. Fanshaw's eyes slitted toward Jack. "About how my wife died?" "I heard it, but not from Jack." "And do you believe it?" Mr. Fanshawe asked, if he already knew the answer. "No," Rue answered. "Well, you should. The gossip was right on the whole." "What do you mean?" Rue asked. "When I first saw Anna, she was sitting on a rock by a waterfall. I had gone in the waterfall to cool off, and when I came out, she was there, above me, watching. I've never felt easy around people, not like your father, but with Anna, it was different. It was effortless. She was—" He faltered, shook his head. "I couldn't believe she loved me too. But she also loved the jungle, and she left it to be with me, so I built her a garden." I brought in the best landscapers from all over the country, and they filled the garden with the same trees and plants and flowers that grew by that waterfall where I first met her. I wanted the garden to be a living poem to her. Everything needed to be exactly the same. I insisted on it. But there was one plant that the landscapers couldn't find, a type of bromeliad. It had a beautiful red bloom and had grown out of the rock that Anna was sitting on when I first saw her. The landscapers brought in plants that were like it, but they couldn't find the exact one. Anna said she didn't care, but I couldn't rest until it was perfect. That's how I'd always been. It was a point of pride for me. I went back to Brazil, back to the waterfall, and I found the plant. I hid it in a mask that was specially made with a false front and smuggled it back into the country. I was that obsessed, and I planted it there. He pointed to the boulder. What I didn't know was that something was hidden in the plant. I found it later, after Anna became sick, when I realized what I should be looking for. A brown spider, very poisonous, hidden in the leaves. But it was already too late. Anna died just a week after the thing had bit her on the leg. I had the garden fumigated, and then I shut it up. I couldn't bear to look at it again. It reminded me that I had been the cause of her death. And Philip, he sighed and shook his head. I took his mother from him, and I'm a poor substitute. I couldn't do anything to help him either, so I just stayed away. Then why did you come back here now? Rue asked. Why did you come into the garden? For the past 2 weeks, I kept seeing Anna everywhere. I would see her standing beside a tree or moving through a marketplace. I'd even hear her voice calling my name, but when I come close, she was never there. I had pushed her out of my mind for so long. Now it felt like she was insisting that I think of her, that I pay attention. I felt like she was calling me back to Cough Rock, back to her. Philip thought he heard her too, Rue reminded him. I know, and now that I'm here, I think that I was wrong. Anna wasn't calling me back to her at all. She was calling me back to Philip.